Hey, fourth grade. Yesterday we read that Teddy regretted going to the autopsy, that a lot of danger and trouble happened because he attended it. Today, let's keep reading. Let's see if we can find out what terrible things we could learn. Ready? Chapter 3, The Autopsy. Getting into the auditorium wasn't any trouble. All the adults had their hands full moving Henry, and the doors were left unguarded for long stretches of time. There was a big network of catwalks and lighting grids over the stage. I scrambled up onto it, found a spot where I could blend into the shadows, and then sat down to watch the show. Once the flat bed brought Henry to the theater. It took about half an hour for everyone to lug him up on stage. Remember, Henry weighs a few tons. He's huge. And an additional 15 minutes for Martin to shoo everyone out. Plenty of adults wanted to watch the autopsy as much as I did, but eventually only Doc, Martin, and I were left in the room with the dead hippo. Doc turned on the stage lights to illuminate Henry. I'd never realized how hot those things were. They burned so brightly I could feel the heat from 5 feet away, but they were also blinding to anyone on the stage, which allowed me to watch with little fear of being spotted. Henry had been laid on his back on a huge sheet of protective plastic. Martin didn't want bodily fluids leaking all over his new stage. As I stared down at the hippo, I'd realized I'd forgotten how big he was. Even as hippos went, Henry was enormous. Doc looked like a toy next to him, barely the size of Henry's head. Martin turned out to be one of the only park employees with no desire to watch the surgery. But then, as I said, Martin didn't like animals when they were alive. A dead one was even more repulsive to him. So he found a seat in the back of the auditorium, as far as he could be from the body, while still being able to talk to Doc, then began texting feverishly into his phone. Doc wheeled out a tray of gleaming scalpels, some of which were the size of meat cleavers. That means huge, not huge, huge. He pulled on a white smock, latex gloves, a face mask, and protective goggles, then took out a canister of clear goo and dabbed a bit under his nose. I wasn't sure what that was for, until Doc made his first incision into the body. Up till that point, I'd been worried that watching an autopsy might make me sick. It hadn't occurred to me that smelling it would. Henry's insides reeked worse than month-old diapers. The goo somehow masked the stench for Doc. But I caught it full on, even from 10 feet above. For a moment, I thought I was going to heave my lunch onto Henry. I had to clap my hand over my nose and wait a few minutes for the nausea to pass. Eventually, I risked looking down. Doc had already made surprising progress given the size of his patient. I should have expected as much. Doc had been a zoo vet for nearly 30 years. He'd done autopsies before. He'd done plenty of them. Still, it wasn't fast enough for Martin, who fidgeted in his seat. "What's taking so long?" he asked. "You do realize this is a hippopotamus I'm working on," Doc shot back. "I have a wall of fat a foot thick to cut through. It's like operating on an opera singer." Someone knocked on the auditorium door. Martin opened it, then ushered Pete Thwacker inside. Although I was trying to keep quiet, I couldn't help but let out a tiny groan. As the head of public relations at Fun Jungle, Pete's job mainly appeared to be to look good on TV. He was handsome. All the women said so, and he knew it. He had blonde hair with so much product in it that it wouldn't budge in a tornado. And teeth so white that a full smile could blind you. He always wore expensive suits and rarely passed a shiny surface without checking his reflection in it. He sounds kind of gross. It was a joke that he worked for Fun Jungle, though. He'd been transferred from a detergent company J.J. McCracken owned. I guess he'd done a good job there. But that didn't mean he was prepared to work at a zoo. He knew less about animals than anyone I'd ever met and was constantly making boneheaded statements. Only 2 days before, during a press conference, he'd said that gorillas were monkeys. I mean, really. So I'd corrected him, telling everyone that gorillas are apes. Although I'd been serious, the reporters thought it was hilarious. Pete did not. He'd kept smiling in front of the cameras for the adults. But after the conference was over, he'd called my mom and claimed he'd seen me shoplifting or stealing at the Fun Jungle Emporium. Then he suggested she should consider sending me to military school. Luckily, Mom had seen right through this. She wasn't a big fan of Pete Thwackers either. Neither was Doc, I discovered. I heard him groan in response to Pete's arrival, too. Have any idea what killed him yet? Pete yelled from the door. He wasn't interested in getting any closer to the dead hippo than Martin was. I think so, Doc said. Really? What? Cigarettes. Did you know that Henry was smoking 6 packs a day? It took Pete a little too long to realize that this was a joke. He sneered. I'd have hoped that you, of all people, would realize how serious this is. Every TV station in the country is calling for me to find out what happened to Henry. CNN says they're breaking the story at the top of the hour. That's 20 minutes from now. If I don't have an answer by then, they're going to think we're hiding something. For all I know, they'll make up a story. I might not be able to give you a cause of death as quickly as you'd like, said Doc. This is going to take time to do right. Please, Pete sighed. It's an autopsy. Just get it done. I mean, so what if you make a mistake? The hippo's already dead. If you want this to go faster, you're welcome to come on up here and help. Pete turned green at the thought of this, like he was gonna puke or throw up. He was saved by the ring of his cell phone and headed to the farthest corner of the auditorium to answer it. Doc returned to his work. He'd finally cut through the fat and reached Henry's internal organs. I leaned out a bit from the catwalk, angling for a better view. I'd seen plenty of dead bodies in Africa, even a couple of hippos, but they were never exactly pristine or perfect. Nothing was dead in the wild for more than a minute before the scavengers descended on it. That was how you usually found a dead animal in the first place. There'd be a cloud of vultures hovering above it. By the time you get there, even if it was shortly after death, the carcass would be torn apart. First the lions would eat their fill, then the hyenas, and finally those vultures that were flying overhead, and the jackals would move in. Within a day, even an elephant could be picked clean down to the bones. So I'd never had a chance to see what a dead animal looked like with all its organs still on the inside. No wonder Teddy was curious. It was less disgusting than I'd expected. In fact, it wasn't really disgusting at all. There wasn't much blood, and the organs didn't appear all that slimy. Inside his abdomen, Henry seemed to be mostly stomach. This wasn't a surprise. Henry had an insatiable appetite, even for a hippo. We'll come back tomorrow and learn all about Henry's eating habits and more about what we learn in the autopsy. Bye, guys.